just want to bring you this story. Right-wing extremists account for 20% of terrorist prisoners. This is the highest proportion since records began, and of course indicates a further sign of a growing threat. Last year, 42 terrorist inmates in the UK were classed as holding extreme right-wing views, up from 18 the previous year. Home Office figures have also revealed that the proportion of people arrested for terrorism offences last year who consider themselves British was over 80%. That's the highest on record. Let's speak with Dr. Bethan Johnson, researcher based at the University of Cambridge and doctoral fellow with the Centre for Analysis of the Radical Right. Bethan, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us. So 1 in 5 prisoners are right-wing. I suppose you could turn that on its head and say 4 out of 5 aren't.
Yes, good afternoon, Ian. Yes, that is true that 1 in 5 isn't the majority by any stretch of the imagination. But the issue is the fact that it's growing and the rate at which it's growing. And also there isn't necessarily a one-to-one correlation between the number of individuals who are incarcerated for these offenses and people who are believing in these policies. So that rise should be worrisome, as well as the fact that it is sort of the tip of an iceberg that's much larger.
Can we drill down at all, Bethan, as to why this is happening? I mean, the smart money would suggest that intelligence services have got better. There's a great focus on this, and therefore they're nabbing more people.
That would be a part of it. I won't deny or dispute that the attention that is being paid in government, in law enforcement, to the issue of right-wing terrorism and extremism is going up because they're responding to a serious threat. We've seen around the world a number of terrorist attacks motivated by this kind of ideology. And that is part of the reason why. However, the other element of it is the fact that these groups are getting better at recruiting people in the UK. They're finding new streams of revenue as well as new audiences that they can speak to. So there are more people who are embracing this ideology than before.
And how are we defining terrorism here? I mean, are these people who've committed acts of physical terrorism? Are they people with terrorist intent? Is it about the ownership of literature, illegal meetings? What precisely defines a terrorist in this context?
Well, there are several different things that could define a terrorist in this context. There are legal barrier definitions of this. So among issues that you could be classified as engaging in terrorist offenses, I believe would include owning terrorist materials. If you're part of a prescribed organization, that would be an issue. Obviously, plotting a terrorist attack or committing a terrorist attack. They're very specific definitions that's different from extremism. So it's not as if every individual who holds ideologies that maybe the majority of society would find repugnant are being classified as terrorists. There's a fairly high threshold as to that in terms of owning certain materials, being part of certain groups, or engaging.
I mean, the only reason I mentioned that last point, Bethan, was because I was trying to think of how many kind of physical terrorist attacks we've seen, and not disputing, of course, the obvious, but I'm not aware of seeing a proliferation of these kind of attacks on our streets.
No, the number of actual attacks that have been successfully executed by individuals isn't the same as maybe you'd see in other countries. We're very fortunate in that way. And in that regard, law enforcement is doing a good job of preventing these kinds of attacks. What you don't want is for all of these terrorist offenses to come from actual successful engagements of terrorism. I would argue that there's a benefit to arresting people prior to their ability to commit acts of terrorism, but for issues that are related to terrorism. So in that way, yes, we're not seeing the same kind of violence maybe as other places, but that doesn't mean we don't have an issue with terrorist ideology and people plotting terrorist attacks.
Indeed, yeah, the preemptive strike, is clearly something we should be pleased that is part of this story. Bethan, thank you, Dr. Bethan Johnson. This is her area, the analysis of the radical right. 0344 499 1000. Kind of fascinated by the kind of all forms of extremism are rather interesting. And they happen in, there's almost there's a spectrum of extremism as well, isn't there? I mean, extremism in terms of your politics, for example. You might be completely wedded to the idea of, I think that the Donald Trump thing did it in this country. The Jeremy Corbyn thing did it as well. You've got those sort of extremes, very deeply ingrained ideas, almost a pathological loyalty, a fan base, an adoration to a leader. that not all leaders get. I don't think Boris Johnson has that, but Jeremy Corbyn did have that. Nigel Farage kind of has a bit of that. And I've said it a long time, the equivalence between, you know, a Corbyn supporter and a Trump supporter are absolutely fascinating. It's not to over-egg it, but it's precisely the same psychology at play. There really is no different. And the obvious example, as I've cited many times, you know, the moment you say you're not a Trump supporter, therefore you must be some kind of mad commie because you don't support Donald Trump. You know, you might support George Bush. You might support Mitt Romney. You might support Mike Pence. Just not Donald Trump. No, that's not good enough. If you don't support Trump, you're a dirty left-winger. It means you must support Biden. This kind of, I mean, it's so anti-intellectual. It shouldn't require me to sit here and explain it or even articulate it, but it kind of does, because you look at it and think, it's so mad, that thinking. And it happened with Corbyn. You know, you had arch left-wingers, people who've been proud socialists all their life. But the minute they said they didn't like Jeremy, they were written off as mad right-wing Tories. Not just Tories, but right-wing Tories. You're a secret right-wing Tory. Well, because you don't support Corbyn? Where does that come from, that kind of thinking? It's absolutely mad.